everybody, welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and today we're going to be making the memory quilt block. Now this quilt block, it looks really complicated and impressive, but when you break it down, it's actually simple to do. It's just a lot of half square triangles. So if you take it one step at a time, I'm sure that you can do it. Now this is the fifth block that we're doing in the Twinkle Sampler Quilt along. So be sure to follow along to see the other blocks that we're doing and get the whole pattern, which has 3 different quilting options. So this is a 12.5-inch block. So for this block, you're going to need a 4.5-inch square of background fabric and 4 2.5-inch squares of background fabric. Now, often in quilts, the background fabric is light and the feature fabrics are darker. But for this one, I'm using a dark background and a light feature fabrics just to switch it up a bit. So you can feel free to use whatever color combination you want to use. Just make sure that there's enough contrast between the background and the feature fabrics so that you can see the design. So you're also going to need 4 2.5-inch squares of the feature fabric. And then you're going to need 24 2.5-inch half square triangles. So this is a lot of half square triangles. So I recommend using paper piecing for this method because you need a lot and they are only 2.5-inch squares. So you can check out a link below to get a video for how to make these units, but you can also use whatever is your favorite technique. You're welcome to use that. You just want these at this stage to be 2.5 inches square, because in the finished quilt, they're going to be 2 inches square. It's also really important because there's so many little pieces that these are accurate 2.5 inches square. So be sure to check them, square them up if necessary, trim them down no matter what method you use, double check them because there's so many pieces and any little inconsistencies will be just multiplied through the block and it will put off the size of your whole block. So once you have those, we're going to go and lay out the block. And this is the kind of block that I really recommend to lay it out at the beginning and lay it out as you're constructing the block because it's so easy to get things turned the wrong way. And the later in the process that it is that you find something turned the wrong way, the more disappointing it is. So you don't want to wait until the whole quilt is finished and then say, ooh, that piece was turned the wrong way, because that's really disappointing. So let's go lay them out. So your 4.5-inch square goes in the middle of the block, and then your feature fabric squares go around it at the corners. So this will help us kind of orientate things. Then the 1/2-inch squares, they will go in pairs around here, and it makes a little sawtooth star of background fabric in the middle. So you can see the feature fabric is making points in toward the then we're going to make background fabric points to point in so we can see we have this arrow on each side. Then your background squares go out at the very edge corners. And the last thing is put in these pieces, and these pieces echo the one that they're beside. So this one's going to be like that. So in the pattern, there's a diagram that you can follow, so I recommend having that close by. Okay, so once these are all laid out, we're going to start joining the pieces together, And we're going to start by joining pairs. Join each one with its neighbor. So we're going to join these two all the way down and then join these as pairs and these as pairs. So we're going to have a lot of pairs. So I turn them over like this. But remember, this is the side we're sewing. Hold them carefully. And then we can take them all to the sewing machine to join. If putting a pin in there will help you remember which side you're sewing, feel free to do that. I'm hoping that if I hold it like this, I can remember. So we're going to take these to the sewing machine now. When you're sewing, it's really important to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, especially with smaller pieces, because each amount that you are off, it will get multiplied across the block. And there's so many seams here, it'll throw off the size of your block. So I've checked the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've put this little marker here to help me line things up. And I recommend to check your seam allowance anytime you're going to start a big project, because a different needle, different thread, different fabric, that can throw it off. So double check and don't just always rely on a 1/4 inch foot. So because we have so many pieces, we're going to chain piece. So we're just going to keep putting in one piece right after the other without stopping in between. I love seeing all these little banners of pieces. So we have all our pairs joined. So now we're just going to clip them apart and then take them to be pressed. When we're pressing ones that have a 1/2 square triangle and a solid fabric, we're going to lay them with the solid fabric up. That way when we press, the seam will be pressed toward the fabric solid side. And the reason why we do that is then when we're going to join them together like this, the seam allowances will nest together nicely. So now we have everything laid out again. We're going to take the pairs and join them to make little 4 patches. And they should all have the seams nest up, and that will help them to line up as you're sewing them together. So join them in pairs and then take them back to the sewing machine. Then we'll come back to press those pairs. So here we have all the pieces, and I have laid them out before pressing them just to make sure things are in the right order, and then I can press them thoughtfully. So I'm pressing them based on what they're going to be joined to next. So this one, I'm going to press these seams toward this background because that's darker. So if you have a darker feature fabric, you might want to press that way. So because I'm pressing this one that way, I'm going to press this one this way, so it's going the opposite direction so they can nest, and that means this one will also go toward the dark. So that's how I'm going to press those 3. These ones, because they're going to be joining the solid center square, and these have a lot of seams in here in bulk, I'm actually going to press these 2 open so that it'll eliminate some of the bulk in those seams. And then on this side, I'm going to repeat the same thing, press toward the dark on these 2, and then this one, press in the opposite directions. So I'm going to press those out and then lay them out again and do one final check to make sure that nothing has been flipped around. So now they're all pressed. I've laid them out. I'm happy with how everything's working out. So now you can see this is basically just 9 patches. It's 3 across and 3 down. So we're going to join it the same as we would a 9 patch block. We're going to join these into rows and then join the rows together. So we'll start with joining these pairs. And you can see again, because we thought about pressing, we press the seams, they're going to nest together. That will make it a lot easier to join. So we'll join those, press, and then join the third pair on, and then we will have our 3 rows. So here we have our groups of 3 that are joined up into strips, and I've pressed these seams toward the center background fabric. And I would do that even if the background fabric was a lighter color. I would press them that way because there's so much bulk in those corners. And then these seams are pressed toward the other direction. And again, that will make it much easier when we join these. So we're going to join these 2 and then join the bottom one, final press, and we're done. So here's our finished memory quilt block, and this is one of those quilt blocks that looks more difficult than it actually is. It does have a lot of little pieces in it, but if you break it down and take it one step at a time, it isn't difficult to do. It just has a lot of pieces. You can use this in a quilt by itself, have a whole bunch of these blocks, or you can use it as part of the Twinkle Sampler Quilt. So check below for more information about that. And for more great tutorials, ideas, and inspiration, check out epidastudio.com.